So welcome everybody. I think we'll get started. I know that there are more coming, but we want to welcome everyone to our third and final installment of the spring webinar series here at Catholic Rural Life. We wanted to start, especially now that we're getting into some warmer weather, we wanted to start with a prayer out of the Rural Life Prayer Book. I thought it was appropriate if we began with a prayer in planting time. So, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear Lord, you are wonderful in everything you do. In marvelous ways, you take the full, rich life of the plant and carefully fold it into tiny seeds. You form the seeds according to many different shapes and sizes and colors, so that man can know what kind of growth will come from them. When they are placed in the earth, they may look dry and dead, but when they are watered by the life-giving rain and nourished by the warm sun, they lose all their lifeless look and grow in an almost miraculous manner. By the power you gave them, they take the dead minerals of the earth and build up the nourishing, tasty food that men need to sustain life. This season, dear Lord, we will plant these seeds that you have given us. Bless them, watch over them, and bring them to the full growth and rich harvest that you wish to bless us with. But should you not allow them to come to full harvest, we accept your will humbly. We trust that you will nevertheless watch over us and make the seeds of grace that you have given us grow to flower and fruit in the full Christian life that you intend for us here and hereafter. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I know especially here as planting season gets underway and, everyone's back out in their fields. We at CRL, we spend a lot of our time praying for the health and safety and success, of so many in our farm communities. So all of you who are, looking forward towards some windshield time in the tractor, know of our prayers for you as we begin this growing season of 2024. And with that, today I am joined by two very special guests, Dr. Jared Stout and Mr. Jason Craig. And we are so pleased to have two experienced and knowledgeable homesteaders here with us to talk about the Catholic homesteading movement, which is a growing movement around the country that so many people in rural life are beginning to get into. And, I know from the folks that I talk to, people are saying, well, I dabble a little bit, or I have some land, I have a garden and some chickens, or things like that. But, those who have, fully embraced kind of the principles of the homesteading movement, I think they're living out the faith in a really beautiful way. So with that, I think, I'll just turn it over to our speakers for a brief introduction, starting with you, Jared, if you don't mind, just telling people about your background and where you're living.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And I have to say that there is only one experienced homesteader on this webinar, and that's Jason, in terms of the guest speakers, at least. I am just starting, but I'm a theologian, and my primary focus has been on the intersection of faith and culture. And just as I've been studying that and teaching it, influenced by Christopher Dawson and John Paul II, I've really strongly come to see that what's missing is the natural foundation of culture, that we've just become so far removed from that. And so in terms of the land and agrarianism, I was influenced by G.K. Chesterton and John Sr., and then eventually Wendell Berry. Was teaching those things at the Augustine Institute, and that's how I got to know Jason. Was at the Augustine Institute studying these things together, and then, a little bit more than 10 years ago, he went off and started living it, and I finally have caught up to him. But in the meantime, I have been pursuing, how the land kind of fits into culture. I have a book called The Beer Option, Brewing a Catholic Culture Yesterday and Today, really looking at how beer is one example of using the fruits of the earth and shaping them and integrating them into human culture, and how we can even approach brewing from a better perspective, Catholic perspective today. I have another book, Restoring Humanity, with a whole chapter on land and evangelization and how that fits into a whole bigger picture of Catholic culture. And then more recently, How the Eucharist Can Save Civilization, and looking at how the Eucharist is the highest expression of God taking up the fruits of the earth and human culture and fashioning them even into something divine, this gift, and how that can be something that reintegrates our lives and begins to restore our culture and even civilization again. Now, I just started homesteading very recently. I'm actually learning a lot from Jason, and so I'm really glad that he's on the call here with me too.
Thank you, Jared. Yeah, thanks for sharing. You know, I have to say, your book, The Beer Option, was had a great influence on me, both as a home brewer and then for a brief period of time, I worked as a professional in the beverage industry. So you know, I really
Cheers.
enjoyed that book. And Jason, you know, speaking of books, I know you just released a book yourself. So I'll turn it over to you for an introduction, a little bit about your story, and then um, you know, maybe tell people about your book.
Sure. I like probably most of the people on this call, I assume that are attending your webinars have grown up in some sort of farming or agricultural background. I did not. However, I was on the cusp of things that, you know, that sort of suburban strip of, you know, where some people, where I lived, you know, you kind of turned one way to go into town and the other way to go out where the fields are. Although now those fields are gone. But my school was sort of split between just people, I guess you would say, in a newer way of life and people in a farming way of life. And it's just experiencing that. But I did grow up farming. I did grow up with a blue collar sort of familial ecosystem around me. So working outside, working with things. Originally I pursued getting into landscaping just because I wanted to work outside. So that was my original thing I started going to school for. Was landscape design, nursery production. But it was during actually studying under Jared at the Augustine Institute and also working with a Catholic apostolate called Fraternus, which was, you know, it was very concerned with how can men and fathers be better at mentoring and initiating their sons into manhood, good, mature Catholic manhood, because that's obviously not happening. And it leads you to the question of why is that not happening? And eventually that leads you to just the fact of, you know, our culture, particularly our country, going from essentially a nation of farmers to having very few farmers, from going from something like 90% of the population to less than 1%, has had a dramatic impact on all sorts of things. And one area of study that I'm interested in is how the father and his role in guiding his children and particularly his sons into maturity. We lost our way of life in farming, and we really haven't replaced it with anything that's been anywhere close to adequate. It's just what we're doing is not working. So this was an intellectual thing for me at that time. This was like 12 years ago, and so we had our second son. His name was Peter George, which means rock farmer. We now live in Western North Carolina with lots of rocks, so that's fitting for him. But we had that second son, and my wife just asked, "Well, where do you see our family in 5 years?" And it was then this time. So I think we just have to be homesteading, and we made the leap. We made the jump, perhaps recklessly so. In fact, I tell my story with a little bit of caution because I don't necessarily suggest that people imitate it, but we just sort of jumped in, found a place to barter. We spent our last little bit of money on 2 milk cows and uh, probably went a little crazy. I mean, we just had, you know, we did what a lot of new homesteaders do. It's a pretty big mistake. I warn people not to do it, but I did it. They do it too, which is show up on the land and just buy everything. And, you know, you got your goats and your cat, like you just get everything. And um, it was actually through that experience in the last 12 years of failure and realizing you can't actually what the way of life that comes from the land, the way of life that is shaped by seasons and really by God Himself more directly through creation, it forms you differently. And what a lot of um, would be and want to be homesteaders get wrong is they think it's just merely a lifestyle choice, and that I can take some of the practices of homesteading and just lay it on top of my suburban life and continue as things were. And I, in the 12 years we've been working on the farm, and we've gone from bartering to a 3 acre farm to now we're on a 20 acre farm. We run a small micro dairy that has oscillated between more commercial production we used to sell yogurt to coffee shops, and we were grade A on a micro scale. But now we've focused more on just growing for our own family and for the like direct local neighborhood that we live in, if you want to call it a neighborhood. Um, in that time, how many people have failed is pretty staggering. So I would not dismiss that the enthusiasm for homesteading is growing. I think every family at some point goes, maybe we should live on a farm. I think every family asks that question. And the book you alluded to, the Alluded to the Land, which I wrote with my friend Thomas Van Horn, because him and I both made a move to the land at the same time. He's a full-time beekeeper, commercial beekeeper, and so we left the city, and we became lands of milk and honey as friends, and but we stayed in constant. We don't live near each other, but we stayed in constant communication about failures and difficulties, and we both saw friends move into the country, move out of the country, and then Jared has been continuing to be a good friend. We've been kind of on this endless intellectual discussion. So the book, we're Catholics. We like to combine the hard work of the hands with the hard work of the mind, and the book is actually what we hope to be a careful consideration, a call to the land, absolutely, in that we do think that society and your family will benefit from a homesteading way of life. But we propose it as sort of a conversion, and the chapters are laid out, presuming that most people that are moving to a homestead are moving away from suburbanism, and that has its own reality to it and its own cultural force and its own like way of life that you probably don't realize you have. A fish doesn't know it's in water, right? If you tell a fish the water's nice, they say, "What's water?" And when you get to the homestead, all of a sudden you realize you might feel like a fish out of water and you didn't know what water was. So it's trying to provide some of the ideas and the conversion that will be required so that you can hopefully make a better, more prudent kind of walk and it might actually, we hope actually a lot of people might read the book and go, I don't need to move anywhere. I'm going to just grow a tomato this year. And so that's what it's about. I don't know if you want to ask any more questions about, which of those conversions are the hardest, or, whatever you think. But that's kind of our background. So now to wrap up, we're here. We've been homesteading pretty seriously for about 12 years. We have 8 kids. We have milk cows. We always have pigs in rotation, the various poultry. Although I don't focus a lot on poultry because everybody and their mom has chickens, but not everybody has milk cows. So we can barter for eggs, and we grow, and then a lot of our vegetables through the spring and summer.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much. And I know when I first saw the announcement of your book being released just recently, it immediately made me think of one of our past speakers on the webinar was Father Jim Schmidtmeyer, who does a lot of work around theology of place. And so I recommend everybody go back and check out the rural spirituality webinar we did last fall with Father Jim Schmidtmeyer. Thanks so much. I think my first and initial question, we're talking about Catholic homesteading. I think many people understand, or many people on the call, understand the principles of the Catholic faith and are going to be interested about how that gets applied to homesteading. But I think the first question is, sometimes it seems like homesteading is a moving target when you try to define it. So, maybe my first question should be, what is homesteading and how does that differ from, say, a hobby farm or gardening, and, even on the other side, large-scale commercial operations? So, where does homesteading kind of fit in this relationship with the land?
Yeah, we do try to define that at the very beginning of the book. So what are we talking about? And why aren't we using the word farming? And to understand it, it is a spectrum. It is absolutely a spectrum. So we wanted to define that spectrum first so that we know where, when we say we're here, there, we kind of have a navigating point. So let's start with what is the natural setting of the family? And I rely heavily on, the definitions of sort of the classical conservative writers, and even in our own day, like Alan Carlson, Robert Nisbet, Father John Rawl, the book of Genesis, that the natural setting of the family is the land. And that the natural occupation of the family is working the land. And the purpose of that occupation is to supply food, shelter, and clothing for the family. Full stop. This is so on a natural level, so relying on natural theology, that is the first stop and purpose of the family. And it's its natural setting. It is where it thrives naturally because that's its ecosystem. And to define that, the household is a productive and economic unit for its own sake. So it's not making money. It's not a lifestyle. It's that the family together, their shared work and purpose is for the material care of each other. That's kind of the beginning. And when we say that, it's like, well, yeah, of course. That sounds right. But then we realize and we think, oh, but that's clearly not the order of modern households. So if we're going to take the homestead is a productive household that's producing for itself. So this is why when people go, well, how do you make money from the land? I'm like, okay, that's another question. That is a question of farming. That is a question of economics and finances. And those are good questions. And our economic financial reality and our day and age makes that a complicated question. Can you start a farm? I mean, when I wanted to start a dairy farm, I kept calling dairy farmers. And I said, how do you start a dairy farm? And they said, you can't. I mean, that was their answer. You can't. Unless you inherited a dairy farm or you're gonna be a mega agribusiness, you're not a dairy farm. And that's just the way of it. So I'm talking when I say homestead, I mean the family that is producing what it needs together. That's what they're doing. On the other end of it is the suburban home, which is not a productive home, but a consuming home. And I don't mean that as an insult, right? Because the homestead also consumes what it grows, right? But I mean, it's a consuming home, meaning everything you do for the good of the family, you typically leave home to do it. Work, recreation, in fact, or work and amusement, all sorts of things, schooling, education. You leave the home for everything and you come home only to consume these things together, right? So this is the household, that is fueled by money primarily. So you leave somewhere, you go somewhere else to make that money, and then you come home to spend it. I mean, that's what you do. Some people have called that it's the recreational household, meaning that the household itself, like the home, is not necessary for the work of the household, right? Whereas the homestead, the land itself, you become dependent on the land and each other in a way that it's not recreational, it's productive. It's a workshop more than a place for lounging, right? But the modern suburban home is more a place of life. This is where I go to recharge my batteries, watch movies together, eat food together, maybe, and hopefully do some of these things together. Or we can do it separately. You can watch your movie on your laptop, and but you're just home doing those things. Whereas I can say this: the reason I'm in the basement right now is my entire family was sick last night, except for me, and all of a sudden I realized how much I needed them because I am like 2 hours behind. Because the cows, the chickens, the pigs, and everything, it was on me alone. Whereas we have sort of this is our way of life, and all of us do something every day, and we all have our responsibilities on the homestead. So, to define the homestead is it's a productive home. And obviously, when we could say a productive home and have a workshop in a city, and that actually follows the same principles, right? A multi-generational mechanic shop never touches a living plant or animal, but it still follows the principles of a homestead. But when I say homestead, that I mean food, shelter, clothes, like the very basics. So it means that we work the land and harvest it for our own sake together. And a lot of people, when they envision and they say, I wish our family lived on the land. That's really what they want. I mean, it's really what they perceive or intuit to be the good that they desire, which is, I wish we could just go outside and work together. I wish I didn't have to drive and commute in to make money. I wish I didn't, I wish I had more than an hour and a half in the evening with my kids before bedtime and getting home from work. They just kind of they don't want to come home and just be together because they can do that now, right? And they kind of get bored. They'll sit around the house and go, "What do you want to do? You want to go to the mall?" Whereas when we're home, when we're home and we're together, we're most of the time we're actually not recreating together. We actually have to, because we have so much to do, we have to be conscious, like, okay, we need a break. My friend, he criticizes our way of life. He said, "Yeah, you take off work, meaning your paying job, so that you can work. I don't want to live a life like that, but that's how we live, I guess." So what I mean by homestead, the productive home on the land as a family. It's a home. It's not first a business, it's first a home. And the natural occupation of that home is to take care of each other.
Great, great. Thank you. Yeah. And Jared, um, same question, anything that you want to add to Jason's comments there? What do you have in mind, for your homestead there that you are currently building up?
Yeah, I would say that the only maybe different perspective that I would bring in, and I know Jason would agree with this, is that intellectually we were convinced for a long time. We said even just for our own health and our own sanity, we realized that we need a more human life. But I mean, for a lot of work reasons, we were kind of kept in the city for much longer than we wanted. But as time went on, we really felt a great urgency, and what kind of tipped us over to say we need to make an enormous sacrifice to start homesteading. It was not an economic reality at the end of the day, it was a spiritual reality. And I really drew that out in the article that I wrote for the CRL magazine recently on my spiritual odyssey to the land. And that's really what it was. We felt for the good of our own souls and the souls of our children that we needed this more human life to do what families traditionally have done, which is, as Jason was saying, to work together, to really have a shared life where we depend upon one another more fully, where we can be healthier in the sense that we are more active in our own care, that we're not just consumers, and kind of locked in this vicious cycle. Because there are a lot of even ethical considerations about where does our food come from? Is it being produced in a humane way? What is the effect of our food on us? And those kind of things were, like I said, weighing on us intellectually for many years. But spiritually, my wife and I both, together, but even in our own kind of discernment, felt that if we don't do something fast, we're really going to miss what God is calling us to do. And so that's something that I can't say everyone else out there. I mean, you have this same call. I don't know, but we did have this call where God was really asking us to prioritize, I think, having this productive lifestyle on the land for our own spiritual good.
Great, great. Well, and I think that kind of dovetails in with my next question is, both of you have lived urban or suburban, kinds of lives, even with marriage and children. What kinds of changes did you see in moving out to the land? What benefits came to your children? How you get the fresh air, sure, but the I think you're right, that it's a spiritual call. That there's a great spiritual benefits. So maybe each one of you can just take a couple minutes and kind of describe the way that you see God calling your family in and through the place where you live.
Well, Jason moved to the land when his kids were younger, and my kids are 7 to 19. And so it's a very different experience for me kind of coming in, 20 years into marriage, and it's certainly harder for the older kids to make that transition. But I would say what I'm happy about for all of my kids is seeing whether it's willingly or unwillingly that they are actually beginning to do things, that things that they just wouldn't do in the suburbs. And for instance, Jason's boys love to hunt. And even though that's something I had always wanted to do and even could have done when I was in Colorado, it was great hunting out there. But it's just hard when you're managing all of these things in the city life. And so now, like, his boys are training my boys to get ready for hunting. And it's just a beautiful thing. And to see them come alive to that. And even when it is kind of unwillingly, I mean, who wants to go out and till the garden or put up garden fencing? But we are doing a lot of things together. And just getting out of the city lifestyle, it's not even something necessarily related to homesteading, but even my relationship with my wife, I am now much more present to her. I'm not leaving the home and going away from her. And so there's these little touch points during the day. And even if I'm still working 8 hours a day because, I have a remote job, so I'm not a full-time homesteader. But there's just these little things that happen during the day that I think bring a richness to life. And we're able to say all pray morning prayer together because we're all there in the morning now. We're not all going our different directions. So it's these little things that are actually creating more of a focused home life for us.
Yeah, that's interesting because, like I said, Jared just got here, and we've been in conversation, and we've sort of on the opposite. That I think my oldest was like 4 or 5, or had to be 5, when we first moved here. And I remember my toddler son, who's actually he's the turkey hunter that's been, leading. As I said, they invited Jared's boys in. I said, guys, you can't hunt a turkey with a posse. You're gonna have to figure out where you're gonna hunt. If anyone's not a hunter, I presume actually a lot of people are. Turkey is a sit and wait kind of hunt. Be quiet, but Henry, who's now this kind of ringleader of the turkey posse out here, when we first got to the land, or to our first homestead, we were blessed to live right on this river, and he stepped with his bare foot in some good river mud and pulled and freaked out. And I remember thinking, I said to my sweetie, to my wife, sweetie, we got here just in time. And what I mean by that is where I lived, I actually was a pretty rural, like my community, like I said, we're kind of on the cusp, and I spent more time on the river, and this was outside of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, if anybody knows, in Pittsburgh, if there's anybody who knows there. And, so we lived up and down the Hall River. And if we were skipping school, which I'm not recommending, I'm just describing, if we were skipping school, we were fishing at the river. And there was ways of life, and that even when we were on the rural days, when we were doing things that rural people did, it was good, even when it was bad, maybe skipping school. And I'm not saying the ends justify the means, but like we were occupied with things that were good. And even as a child, just sports in the woods. And what I mean by all this is the relationship, for my kids especially, the relationship with the land itself, with and just for me, I did not grow up Catholic or even in a believing home, but I did grow up in the woods, and I credit creation and God's disclosure of Himself and the created order of things as being part of my salvation. That He really did make Himself clear to me. I later working in different apostolates, I hear the stories of people that really struggle with whether or not God is real and if He loves them, and think because of the woods, I didn't have that feeling, that sense. And I understand that to be a grace, undeserved, but also the world itself. So I just mean my kids have a relationship with this land and this place. I think Jared's probably seeing it. I mean, they're rooted here. They know the neighbors and the characters. They have these funny stories. They look to their place where they are for their life, And so the thing I'm grateful for, and Jared and I had these conversations with people that have teenagers or something that move. It's like you start to learn to see your life in other places, and I see Jared's family, seeing their life coming together around this place in their home. The other thing is, as a family, as I see our kids growing up, is that we are growing more and more integrated with the things that if we weren't living here, we'd have to work really hard to like find balance. So I often compare the words balancing and integrating. So balancing is where there's a ton of things, right? You have to slice the pie right and balance the scales correctly. And as an example, as a father, we have to work. We have to work. but a lot of times I have to choose between how am I going to work and spend time with my kid, do all these things. Whereas the great thing about the homestead and the work of the homestead is I have to work in there with me. So that's where instead of keeping these things in balance, they're integrated. And which is why I tell people when they say, well, I want to move and have a simple life. I just want to make sure you understand that this life is not simple if by simple you mean less things to worry about. It's actually more things. When you're going to bed and you hear the wind and you start to think to yourself, like, is the greenhouse plastic down? You know, um, there's kind of a constant, um, there's a ton of things. In fact, if anything, there's more. If we mean simplicity to mean less things to worry about, then that's not the homestead. But if by simplicity you mean those things come into a greater wholeness and integration together, then yes. So the with my family, I don't think I would be a good balancer. I don't think I have a knack for managing the control of many different things. Um, I am good at having the knack of just being a part of a bigger whole and working, being sort of leading that in a fatherly way. Um, Whereas I think that has been a great grace to me that I'm not having, as an example, milking cows. I don't have to make the decision on if I'm going to spend some time with some kids, right, every day. We're going to do this every day. It's just going to happen.
That's great. That's great. So not simple balance, but simple integration. Beautiful. Well, um, I know, especially kind of on that topic, both of you uh, have some amount of work off the homestead, and I wanted to know kind of how that plays into your day to day, your work. I want to ask you a million questions about what you raise and your everyday experience there on the homestead. But I think for a lot of people, they're wondering, how at least do I satisfy the requirements of those economics as I'm getting started. So, um, Jared, if we want to start with you about, how exactly do you integrate what you're doing there on the homestead and the work that you're doing because you're with Exodus 90 as well, is that right?
Yes, so that's my primary role is director of content for Exodus 90. And when my wife and I really were feeling this urgency to do something, and I remember telling my wife, I said, well, I think what I just really need if we're going to move forward is a remote job, just economically to make this happen. And of course, that is just more and more of a possibility for people today. If they're looking for something like that, there's much more remote work than there ever was. Um, but of course, then you are in that position of balance that Jason was addressing, right? How do I balance all of this? So I was able to start with Exodus 90 almost a year and a half ago, and that enabled us to move and kind of get things going. And for me, I mean, the mission of Exodus 90 is to help men to live, I think, a really integrated life. We've been talking a lot about integration, but, you know, with prayer being first, living a disciplined and ordered life, in having community with other men. And it's complementary to the work that Jason does with Fraternus. And so moving here, I've actually been able to be a part of his Fraternus chapter, which is wonderful because it gave me immediate access to a community of men in our area. So it's just really grounding and drew me into what was happening here. So I would say that in terms of the daily rhythm, as I mentioned, we're able to kind of get up, to pray together, to do our own meditation and then to pray together, and just to have some time to get the kids set up with school, and I'm able to work throughout the day, and then to really have some then family time in late afternoon and evening, just depending on the day, for these common projects. And then of course Saturday is a very big day to get things done around the homestead. And in terms of what we're doing, I mean, gardening is probably the one thing that we've really pursued consistently throughout the years. And being in Colorado for almost 12 years, and we were, even when we lived down in Castle Rock, we were over 6,000 feet in elevation. And so now moving to the kind of foothills of the Appalachians here in Western North Carolina, we are shocked at how well things grow. It's like we're not used to that from being in Colorado in the high desert, you know? It's like, oh my gosh, things actually grow here. This is amazing. So we're really growing a lot, and we are beginning to raise chickens. So, I know Jason said, well, everybody has chickens, but for us, that's where we need to start, and we're really going to build up from there. So we're trying to move slowly. I know Jason said a lot of people jump in and they want to do everything at once, but we're trying not to go that route. And so just to really, focus on the gardening, starting with chickens. And we already are now, I think, learning and building up a lot of ideas and plans so that we can keep building just step by step and not get ahead of ourselves.
Great. Well, and just a follow-up question, especially, I know both of you have, kind of a theological background, but Jared, what are you seeing as kind of, the direct spiritual or, theological fruits of having just made this transition, besides the fact that it might feel like you're getting into the promised land or something where the ground is actually fertile and the climate is cooperating with your efforts a little bit more than maybe in Colorado?
I would say that in Denver, right? Because I was living outside of Denver, driving in every single day. I mean, I just felt this kind of like frenetic activity, just being constant stressor. I feel a lot more peace on the land. And actually, I remember being up in the Rockies and enjoying just this beautiful night sky. And this was probably 10 years ago, And I just said a prayer. I said, Lord, I want to see this kind of sky every night. And there was actually a red shooting star that went across the sky right as I said that prayer. And so just when I walk outside at night now, I say, Lord, thank you for answering that prayer. And it might sound, quaint, but it's actually really significant to me, to just be able to enjoy the beauty and the peace of the land that God has provided for my family. And it really was, when I talk about a spiritual odyssey, I mean, we just celebrated our 20th anniversary last summer, and I mean, there's been so many ups and downs with work and with health and family life and all kinds of challenges. And there was probably 4 times when it looked like we were maybe on the cusp of being able to make this big move. And then it finally happens. And, you can attribute it to, well, I finally got the right job or things finally worked out financially. And I would say, no, like God's providence has finally arranged that this came to fruition at the time that he wanted in the way that he wanted. And I really look at this as a gift. And there is a lot of peace and joy that come from that just in very small ways. And I know it's just the beginning, right? But I'm also already just very grateful for what we've been given.
Great, great. I know Dr. Carmina Chap, who was on our last webinar, she kind of shared a similar sentiment about, that it was really the fruit of prayer. Both she and her husband had prayed, kind of received some of the same things in prayer at the same time. And then it was a great deal of providence when they moved out to their 11-acre farm. Jason, the same kind of question about, incorporating your work outside of the homestead, with what you're doing day to day. How does that work out? What's the necessity, and maybe if, thinking about other people who might be desiring to make this move, you know, what advice would you give them as far as incorporating off the homestead work with the work that you're doing there?
Sure. I think, well, one thing I'd point out is like the writings of Father Raw, about homesteading sort of on the side as a sort of part-time activity of the family. He proposed that this should be very normal. This is a normal thing. And I think probably there's a lot of farmers. I have one of my mentors was a dairy farmer. He's now retired, and now he's homesteading. Right. And so he's able to homestead a lot more. He kept a little garden on the side, but I would say actually farmers probably have to ask the same question, which is, gosh, because they have, if not more work well, definitely more work that's demanding where they have to balance these things. So farming as an occupation is not that much unlike a lot of other occupations in relationship to homesteading. And this is where, ironically, the modern technology of telecommunications and remote jobs has made it perhaps more possible than ever to be homesteading. And that's ironic because I can tell you this screen right here can also remove the moment I'm here looking through this window, I'm somewhere else. And that's a huge challenge. Um, but it's also this is where no, I don't think the screen did not, was not on one of the trees in the Garden of Eden, right? This is a construct of man, so which just means I have to be careful with this construct, um, and the way that I integrate it or don't with sort of the liturgy of the land, the work of the land itself. So as far as how we do it, um, it's part of it is actually breaking out of some like industrial confines of how we understand work and work days and all that. As examples, like the reason the 9 to 5 workday is defined thus is that um, you know society sort of demanded that factories stop working people, for entire things. Like they have to have some time at home, right? We have to have put some limits, right? So I guess McDonald's has to decide when breakfast ends, at 10 o'clock or whatever. And so does society has to decide when work ought to start and stop. But anyone who works on land knows, well, the chickens get put up at night, right? And the cows get milked in the morning. So that 9 to 5 thing for us is we have kind of a rhythm of the day, and which our family revolves again. The work obviously that I do is necessary, and so is the work of the home is also necessary. It's not as if they need to work together. So we get up early, we pray, we breakfast, we milk together, and then ironically, I'm able to be in the office. We can get a ton done by 9 o'clock. Then I'm in there for a couple of days, or a couple, the couple of hours. I might come out at lunch, check on the farm, see what the projects are doing, how they're going, help with something. It also helps that I'm here. If the cows are out, it's like, okay, I'll go. I can go help. I'm available. And then for the way we do it as a family is we have a pretty early supper and we do our chores together at night, and then we pray our rosary and go to bed like as early as possible. My wife and I kind of have a joke like we're basically done parenting at about 7. So um, we love you, but we're gonna love you from your room, and that's a time when I can, and they're reading, and obviously we're cultivating other things too. I mean, our intellectual life, our prayer life, the silence. But that gives me an opportunity to get back on the screen, and to be able to do some work. So throughout the day, I can just base it on the rhythm. Now that is something, and I tell people all the time, is when you're going to homestead, you have to discern that. I mean, obviously, I just voiced a lot of choice and flexibility in my job, and that's true. And I don't want to discount that um, as something, your ability to provide from a remote job, that's not always in someone's choosing, which is why in the book, The Liturgy of the Land, we have in there a breakdown of all the different things you can do. Like, say you want to do it with something. Here are sort of some of the demands of um, the different, we call these economic enterprises. So if you have to travel a lot, right, where you're going to be gone for weeks at a time and your kids are really young, you probably ought not to get a milk cow that you milk when you're there and then you dump on everyone else, especially, yeah. So what you're able to do, you need to discern that based on what your family actually can do. And I don't discount that. I have great grace and the flexibility. I've got work I've got to get done, but when I don't have to clock in at 9, clock out at 5. And also, for us, the other industrial model is like God gives us one Sabbath day, but the industrialized society gave us another one because it was so tiring to be in. So this is why we have a weekend. Like these guys need 2 days off. One, like God's one day wasn't enough. We gave everybody another day. But with the kids, I always say, sorry guys, the Lord says 6 days you shall labor. So we do a lot of our work. We treat Sunday as Sunday, and we don't have 2 Sundays. Is how we do it, and that includes sometimes the work that I have to do. So that if you think about stretching your work out, into 6 days, and then that flexibility, it actually becomes pretty doable to do a lot of things. So instead of me clocking out of work and us just spending money and recreating together, It's not always bad, but we do work together. It's what we do together as a family. Um, and that's how we've done it. The other thing, just on the like full disclosure of how it can be done and how, because we can romanticize it. Well, I'm doing it. Why aren't you doing it? And that can be actually cruel to some people that aren't in the that don't have this available to them. I do think everyone can decide. I mean, look, you can get a pot on the apartment porch, and get a tomato, but um, the the economic reality of what's available to you with land usage and where you are. I mean, we could not have been where we are now. We first found a farm we could barter for. We didn't own. We just labored, and then we found a 3-acre farm that we really scrimped and saved to be able to afford. And then only with my father, were we able to buy this farm and do that together. So, a lot of people, I think it's important when you're talking with people, it's like, how did you do it? That you find people that are, in full disclosure that, the beautiful apple orchard down the road from me is financed by family, investment, which is beautiful. But you might be able to go, well, why can't I have that? It's just not an available resource to you. Some people have farms that they can inherit and just kind of step into, and a lot of people don't. And so I guess my point is, homesteading the productive household is sort of a beginning idea, but we have to make sure that we don't create an ideal in our head that we're actually pursuing that is either unrealistic or of our own making and not really discerned in prayer and the reality of your family situation.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great insight, I think. I just want to remind everybody that so we have about 10 or 15 minutes left. There is a Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen. We've gotten a few questions to come in so far that we're going to have time for. But if you have a question for Jared or Jason, some stuff about homesteading, drop it in the Q&A, and hopefully we'll be able to get to it before the end of the call. I think just some kind of brass tacks as far as Jared, you mentioned strong garden and chickens. Jason, we've kind of heard a little bit about the milk cows and things like that. What other things are you producing on your homestead? And at least what I'm kind of thinking right now is, oftentimes when we think of a farm, it's corn, it's soybeans, it's cattle, and usually farmers are picking 2 of those things. Could you maybe give us a little bit of the laundry list of things that you're producing there, in a significant way, not just an herb garden on your windowsill, but the homesteads are incredibly diverse. So maybe just give our audience a little insight into what kind of diversity you have.
I think another, I was just going to say another kind of great addition to our community here is that there was a banker who graduated with a liberal arts degree, but kind of felt like he needed to do more in terms of living on the land. And so he's now here as a local butcher. And so I think what can sometimes enable, I think more things to happen is when you have synergy even across homesteads. And so, he is, not only there to butcher, but also maybe sell meat shares. And so for us, I'm trying to think about, okay, what could I do? I mean, well, if I'm raising pigs, that could not only support my own family, but might be able to, really be in cooperation with this local butcher shop. And then Jason mentioned his friend Tommy Van Horn, who does honey, and he's come up here, and there's been some kind of joint ventures with honey. And so, even here, whether it's somebody living across the street from us, like the butcher, or if it's even a couple states away, Tommy with his honey, I think what's great is that there's a little kind of micro economy kind of coming together as families are working together. But Jason can certainly give some other suggestions here as well.
As far as again, we rated this, the way we rated it in Litter to the Land is, what is the time it takes from your family? And so remember, when we say economic impact, we do not mean can you make money from it. Here in the South, I hope I'm not offending anyone here. There's a saying that a Southern man eats what he can sell instead of the Yankee that sells what he can eat. So hope I'm not offending anyone. We can say that without just say, eat what you can sell instead of sell what you can eat. Um, and so we're talking about producing food for your family, and we rate them on what does it take from your family, what is the learning curve, what's the infrastructure cost, and then what's the return. So people, for us, we are completely sustained, and we have been for a number of years on meat and dairy. And the reason we focus on that, we have 5 boys, we have 8 kids, 5 of them are male, and protein's important. So we focus a lot on the meat and the dairy. So from now, that's a huge demand. But I tell people, if you want to produce food for your family, you want to like a high impact, high yield, regular thing, a milk cow is one of your best bets. However, you're going to milk that cow every day, and that's very limiting. If that's a limiting factor that causes harm to other way of life that you're not willing to give up, then don't get a milk cow. But if I were to, I think in the book, Tommy and I, we rated everything. We kind of had some subtle arguments about, and this is good, right? You ask any 2 beekeepers how to keep bees, and you'll get 10 opinions, But the things like a pig, you can raise a pig in 6 months and have hundreds of pounds of meat for your family. And then by doing that, you have a place as a father, you hate seeing food go down the drain, right? Or in the trash can. So you've got a place for all your scraps. If you rotate your pig correctly, you bring fruitfulness and goodness to the land. You don't have to just have a moonscape of a pig pen. You have the enjoyment of the pig. And it's enjoyable because piglets start is really cute. And everyone goes, how can we ever kill this thing? And then they're 300 pounds, and you're like, I can't wait to kill this thing. So pigs are very abundant. They're also, this is a factor when I compare to the milk cow, a 6-month dedication to a pig, and then you're done. And you might, as a family, if you can get past an HOA or something, like if a group of families could just raise 1 to 4 pigs a year, there's a huge abundance there. And even if you're purchasing all the feed and you're not able to graze or grow any of the feed, right, you're still getting a better quality product, most likely, than you can get in the store at a lower price. And then you have all the goods. So I definitely think of pigs, but generally livestock requires more long-term commitment, and the risk of failure and disaster is pretty, the loss of those things. Or my friend who had Jersey cows in downtown Charlotte, and they were running down a 4-lane highway. There's risk with livestock. More passive, when you show up on a homestead, plant your berries and fruit trees. If we live in a region that we have a lot of fruit trees, but as far as an easier crop that requires less intervention and chemicals, basically, would be berries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries. Those, and then vegetable gardens, those things you can go out of town, and if your vegetable garden, the expense of seeds is so minimal, compared to the return on them. It's just so abundant. And then the worst thing that happens with vegetative plants is they die and they become compost and soil. It's just not a big deal. So livestock's very abundant when it comes to protein and things. And then obviously vegetables can be they're low initial investment, pretty high labor, but pretty reasonable good return. Some of those other things require more infrastructure, pigs, cows, bees, and then the learning curve. Sorry, I'm going on and on, but there's each one of these things can consider the learning curve as well. Like you can probably figure a pig out quicker than you're going to figure out sheep, just because sheep have more, parasite pressure and things like that. The pig is just a pretty good way to start.
Sure. Yeah, great. I want to get to a few questions from our Q&A, and one of the questions that I'm sure both of you get asked quite frequently is how do you take a vacation? How do you take any break, or how do you spend time away? Is there a community? Is there, how do you plan for emergencies?
As far as being here a little bit longer, for a long time, we just didn't. And I actually think, G.K. Chesterton said that the city dweller is the only creature in all of creation and time that has to leave its habitat to feel at rest. So part of it is we don't feel the same urge. So I just got to get out of here so I can breathe. I mean, part of it is just I don't think life where I am requires that I leave to. Now, I want my children to know what a beach is. I do want to go on hikes. So the way we have done it is to either, and this might not sound like we split up the family because somebody's got to stay home and milk the cows, or blessedly, recently, you know, with the Jared mentioned the butcher across the street, you know, we were able to leave for a week as a family because he milks the cows. So as the community has grown and people's ability to be a part of that has grown, that's made that more possible. And this is, I mean, the fruitfulness of community and living on the land is that actually things become easier and better. That's what I don't think we actually subconsciously believe that more means depletion. And so in this order of things, it's been good for us. So and the other way is we either split up or we've been able to have someone do the chores for us. But by and large, we love to take off, meaning me, my office job, the remote job, take off to just be fully present on the farm for a while together. You know, we might go into town and get ice cream more often or something like that, but we don't feel quite the same urge to leave.
I have some necessary travel coming up in the fall. And so I have like two sets of kids, the three older ones and the three younger ones. So we're just going to bring the three younger ones and let the older ones tend to things while we're gone. So it's Jason's strategy of splitting the family up. But you know, if everyone does have to go, yeah, I think we do have to rely on one another in the community.
Great, great, which, you know, seems to speak to, you know, more of that integrated life, you know, not just integrated within yourself or within your family, but also integrated into the community. As, you know, Jared, you were mentioning about, you know, especially as a newer member of the community, looking at what kinds of skills and things you want to develop to put at service of the larger group of families there in the area.
And
Another,
it's sorry, just to interject here quickly. I mean, it's why we chose to come here, right? Of all the places we could go in the country, you know, we wanted to be part of a community, not some kind of commune or whatever, but just a group of individuals who are like-minded who could build a life together and rely on one another.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to just piggyback off that because people ask this question a lot, and I think a lot of people move into an isolated situation, and that can be hard. Now, community life is hard. As I think some great writer said, if you want to be disappointed with life, make sure you're part of a community, you know, just like a family. But it's how we grow in holiness. But we were very much alone here for a long time, and I think it was a grace that we were able to enjoy and sort of have what we had. And now, you know, there's in our right where we are, there's now 4 or 5 Catholic families. And we don't like see them all the time. We're out weeding each other's gardens. I don't want to paint a picture of a village, you know, procession here. But we're here for one another, you know, and that's a very unconsidered part of this idea for a lot of people. And finding those places can be hard, but there's people out there planting the flags and saying, "I'm here," you know.
beautiful, beautiful. What a great way of life. I think you may have already answered this question a little bit. This is another one that's coming out of the Q&A is, you know, in Catholic Rural Life, we have a lot of members, a lot of constituents around the country who are, you know, who are doing conventional farming, you know, large scale production, things like that, where, you know, it's cash crops and, you know, just some of the folks that, you know, you were kind of describing before. You know, and one of the questions that has come up for us when people have asked about homesteading is there's usually some skepticism, you know, and things like that. So the question that's come through is, what do you say to a conventional farmer who might just say, "Oh, you guys are doing large scale farm gardening," you know, or something like that, or you know, this isn't.
Yeah, I think.
You
I
know,
mean, I have some of my, well, one, I would say to homesteaders, do not dismiss your conventional mentors because you're not seeing them on the YouTube channels you're watching, right? Um, Now, I also tell those homesteaders, and when you show up and they're skeptical of you, um, be humble because they've seen a lot of people like you probably come and go, and they've been here rooted in this place for a long time. And they have, one of my closest mentors is very conventional. I mean, GMO crops and all the controversial things, but he also has a very deep affection and knowledge of the land that I think a lot of people, if they're not, they will dismiss his wisdom. And I have just learned and relied so much. And I've learned from him. Now, on the other side, he's like, oh, you're one of these people that's going to plant an acre of corn and let it fail while I'm growing 500 acres of it. But, sort of scoffing. And I think he's actually had an appreciation of our way of life, that he is part of multi-generational farms, and he has seen our community here lose its farmers and lose the families that ran the farms. And so he knows that the way things are going, with what we're calling here conventional farming, he knows that it has not necessarily been good for the farmer. Because, and if we took a look at it from a social and spiritual perspective, we have more farming and less farmers, right? So he is now lonelier and he wants more people. And I'm actually pretty, we're living on the same land, right? We're on different scales. Those people that are flippantly dismissal of the desire and the call and the practice of homesteading, I don't find conventional farmers that are dismissive to be much different from a city dweller to be dismissive. That I don't think they actually understand what homesteading is attempting, and what homesteading is doing. And I mean, really, they have the same mindset. John Senior said some of industrial farming that sometimes it's a factory in the field. And industrialization causes us to think in certain ways where we dismiss anything inefficient, right? Like having a family milk cow. Somebody might say, why don't you just go buy milk? Just go make a buck and buy milk. Why are you doing this? And I think they're actually dismissing a lot more than they've really considered. So I'm sympathetic to why they think the farming and homesteading, as I hope we've defined, are not necessarily the same thing. And farming for profit, and the great debate between Wendell Berry and the what's the Department of Agriculture. This quality of life, quantity of, this has been going on for quite some time. It's worth having. Anyone who's flippantly dismissive, is just, I mean, to be blunt, you're not really thinking through what's actually occurring around us. And I'd be careful. But the homesteaders, if you're annoyed by the pride, you live on the land, you just show up. But I understand their skepticism. It's a way of life they haven't grown up in. They might not appreciate it, but I think probably in both directions there can be some humility and goodwill offered.
I think at the end
Eric,
of the day,
anything?
it's just families who want to live a better way of life. And so if somebody dismisses and say it's just larger gardening or hobby type things, I'm okay with that as long as the family's doing something good.
Amen. Amen. Beautiful. I know I let us run over, so I apologize to everyone who's stuck with us and everything. I just want to give Jared and Jason just kind of one more opportunity to plug the work that they're doing. And Jared, Jason, if you want to just let people know, where can they find out more about you? Maybe where can they find some of the dairy products that you're producing? Those types of things, or the work that you're doing, the beautiful work that you're doing, especially with men, both of you in your respective organizations.
Well, we have some shared projects. We're actually editing a volume right now on the American Catholic land movement, because the British distributists get a lot of attention. So we're kind of looking at the American tradition of homesteading and how it's central to the American story. So that's going to come out with 10 books. And then, Jason, this hasn't come up, but he does a lot of events for men and their sons, and also for those considering homesteading through St. Joseph's Farms. And I'm hoping to get more involved in that. But in terms of my own personal work, you can find me, exodus90.com, but also on my own website at buildingcatholicculture.com.
Yeah, if somebody is interested, particularly in the ideas of the book and that side of things, theliturgyoftheland.com is where you can purchase the book directly from the authors. It's actually Tommy. So Tommy the beekeeper makes candles now. He used to sell honey. Now he mostly focuses on candles. He does sell the honey, but in bulk. But um, and if you go there, we'll be announcing very soon a conference with a number of farmers and homesteaders that is geared towards helping families that are considering and discerning a different way of life, sort of giving them a very serious and fruitful consideration. So you could go to that. As far as the ideas, obviously Fraternus is out there. Anyone, but if you're not near a chapter, there's only like 35 of those. That can be, but look it up. But then as a publication, if you wanted to stay in touch with these ideas, which we have a magazine called theswordandspade.com, and that's actually the editors are myself, who's kind of this out in the woods, voice in the wilderness nut job, and then the other counterpart is a very well read and holy mechanic in the city. So it's sort of reconsidering the family economy, the local community from two different perspectives, and we have it's particularly related to families and fathers and how taking Catholic social teaching and the reality of our day-to-day work, especially in the culture of the home. So theswordandspade.com.
Great. Thank you so much. Just as kind of a final note from Catholic Rural Life, we have a big event coming up here on May 8th in St. Paul, Minnesota. There's still just a very small window of time left to sign up if you want to come to Minnesota in early May and celebrate our 100-year anniversary. Cardinal Dolan and Monsignor Shea will both be kind of keynote or large speakers during the event, but we'll also have some opportunity for some education sessions and things like that. So check out our website and come if you haven't already signed up. And if you've already been thinking about joining us for May 8th, this is the warning bell. The time is running out to get your tickets. Otherwise, thank you to everybody who has tuned in either live with us today or stuck through the video on YouTube. This was a fantastic conversation and really just a great capstone to our spring webinar conversations. So Dr. Jared Stout, thank you so much. Mr. Jason Craig, thank you for joining us and sharing about this this beautiful risk and sacrifice that you've done in order to move your family out to the land and really be a beacon for many of us who feel like we're kind of half in, half out, foot in both camps kind of thing. So thank you so much. And if anybody wants, we will be sending out a survey after this webinar. So give us a review. Tell us what webinars we should be doing next. And with that, safe planting, safe growing season this year, everybody.